A black man walks into a luxury hotel and gets ignored at the front desk. The staff had no idea he wasn't just another guest. He owned the entire building. What happened next exposed years of hidden discrimination and triggered a wave of justice that no one saw coming. If you feel drawn in, make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow we have a story that will leave you speechless. The lobby was grand. Marble floors polished to a shine, chandeliers hanging like frozen fireworks, the scent of citrus and ambition in the air. But none of that mattered, because as Jerome Wilson stood at the front desk, dressed simply in jeans and a dark sweater, he became invisible, not in a metaphorical way. Literally invisible. People brushed past him. The receptionist, a young blonde woman named Kim, didn't even glance up. She was scrolling through her phone like she was on break from caring. And Jerome had felt this before, too many times. 47 years old, CEO of a billion-dollar hospitality empire, a man who built everything from scratch, no silver spoon, just grit, sweat, and nights too long for any man's soul. But here he was again, a black man in his own hotel, treated like an unwanted guest. He didn't wear his usual suit today. No press, no entourage, no power aura. Just a man walking into one of his own creations. It wasn't a random decision. It was a test, because he'd been getting reports. Guests mistreated, staff turning a blind eye, discrimination in the air like a bad cologne. And now, standing in the very place where he once laid the foundation stone, Jerome felt the weight of something much older than a booking error. He remembered his father, a janitor who never missed a shift in 30 years, and yet was always called boy. He remembered his mother refusing to look tired in front of customers, even when arthritis clenched her hands like iron. Jerome had vowed to build something better, a place where no one would be made to feel small. But today it happened to him. Again, he cleared his throat. Nothing. He tapped the desk. Silence. Finally, he said, "Excuse me." Kim sighed, the kind of sigh reserved for people who dare to interrupt mediocrity. This wasn't just poor service. This was a reminder. No matter how far you climb, some people will always try to drag you back down. Jerome smiled softly, but his eyes were steel. Let's see how deep this rot really goes, he thought. Because tonight, he wasn't just checking in. He was waking the empire. Reservation name? Jerome's voice was even, calm. The kind of calm that comes not from peace, but from years of swallowing rage with grace. Jerome Wilson, he said. Kim barely looked up. Her fingers moved on the keyboard like they had better places to be. She didn't search. She performed. A performance of apathy, of cold detachment. A half smirk formed on her lips. MHM? Nope. Don't see it. No apology. No second glance. Just dismissal. Jerome raised an eyebrow. You sure about that? Kim, eyes still glued to her phone, gave a nonchalant shrug. Pretty sure. That was it. Conversation over. He could have been asking for directions in a foreign land where empathy didn't exist. But Jerome wasn't just anybody. He had seen these patterns before. Long before he became a CEO. Back when he worked night shifts mopping the floors of motels that wouldn't let him check in. Back when his only suit was a borrowed one for job interviews where he was overqualified or not quite the right fit. He learned long ago that some people don't need permission to disrespect you, just an excuse. And today, his excuse was simple. He didn't look the part. I have a confirmation email, he said, pulling up his phone and holding the screen toward her. She didn't even glance at it. Yeah, well, system doesn't lie. Jerome narrowed his eyes slightly. Neither does my email. Kim let out a long, theatrical sigh. Maybe you made a mistake. Booked the wrong location. Happens. There it was. The moment she made her judgment. Not just about the reservation, but about him. He was a maybe man. Maybe confused. Maybe lost. Maybe didn't belong. He inhaled slowly. Not yet. Not here. There was still a benefit of the doubt. Check again, he said. Another eye roll. Another lazy tap of the keys. Still nothing. She turned back to her phone. Conversation closed. But Jerome wasn't done. He pulled out his second phone. Not the one for emails. The one for executives. The one with unrestricted access to internal systems. 3 taps, a brief login, and there it was. His reservation. Booked. Confirmed. Assigned. But then he checked the logs. Deleted. Manually. By Kim, front desk. He paused. Let it sink in. The absurdity. The audacity. His heart didn't race. It slowed. That familiar, focused calm that came when the gloves were off. He looked up. Kim was still tapping her screen, fingers too confident. He smiled. Tell me something, Kim. She didn't even flinch. What happens when you delete a reservation? She shrugged. It just removes it from the system. No big deal. No big deal, he echoed, nodding. And who can do that? Only front desk staff, she said, eyes back on her phone. Like yourself. Yeah, obviously. Jerome turned the screen around. Her name, next to the deletion log. Her gaze froze. For the first time, her phone was forgotten. Jerome leaned in slightly. Why did you delete my reservation, Kim? Mouth open. No words. This was an accident. It was a power play, a micro-assault, a subtle act of gatekeeping, and now exposed. I didn't, she started. Don't, he said. Just one word. But it dropped like a stone into the silent lobby. She flinched. Save it. His tone wasn't angry. It was measured, like a judge delivering a sentence already written. He stepped back and exhaled. A part of him wanted to shout, to call out the injustice to every guest in the lobby. But no, this required finesse. He leaned on the counter, smiling. Here's what's going to happen, Kim. You're going to find me a room. Right now. She hesitated. He didn't repeat himself. Scrambling now. Fingers shaky, she typed faster. Okay, room 1427. Of course. He almost laughed. Room 1427. By the elevators. Next to the maintenance closet. Overlooking the dumpsters. The worst room in the building. He had designed this hotel. And she thought he would notice? Kim, he said softly, do I look stupid to you? Her face paled. No, Then why are you playing me like I don't know exactly what you just did? Silence. Around them, the room had grown still. A couple on the leather couches pretended not to eavesdrop. A bellboy shifted nervously by the wall. Jerome picked up the key card, examined it. Thanks, Kim. And then he walked toward the elevators, not defeated, but ignited, because now he wasn't just a CEO in disguise. He was a man on a mission. And by the time the doors closed behind him, everyone in the lobby had that strange, electric feeling something's about to happen. The door to room 1427 clicked shut behind him, and Jerome exhaled, not in defeat, but in preparation. The room was exactly what he expected. Narrow, dim, the air faintly sour from its proximity to the dumpsters below. The faint hum of the elevators bled through the thin walls. It wasn't just a bad room. It was a message, but messages had replies. Jerome sat down on the edge of bed, pulled out his laptop, and logged into the internal system. What he found didn't surprise him. It infuriated him. Kim's name was scattered across complaints like bullet holes in a wall. Guests reported racial discrimination, refused service without documentation, dismissed concern with sarcasm, marked guests as no-show while they were waiting in the lobby. There was a pattern, not just negligence, malice, and all of it had gone unanswered. He scrolled further until he found the answer. Stephen Lane, general manager. The kind of man who always smiled too hard and did too little. The kind of man who feared confrontation more than failure. The kind that let rot grow beneath polished surfaces. Jerome closed the laptop with a soft click. Time for a conversation. The lobby hadn't changed, but the air had. Jerome walked with calm precision. Guests turned their heads. Whispers stirred like wind in tall grass. Even Kim, still at her post, flinched slightly as he passed. But he didn't stop for her. He went straight to the manager's office. Didn't knock. Didn't need to. Stephen looked up, startled, and immediately paled. Mr. Wilson, what a surprise, he stammered. standing too fast and knocking a paperweight off his desk. Jerome shut the door behind him and leaned against it, arms folded. "Cut it, Stephen. We need to talk." Stephen swallowed. "Of course. What can I... You know what's going on at your front desk." A pause, then a pathetic attempt at deflection. "Well, I think..." "Wrong answer." Jerome snapped. "I had my own reservation deleted by your staff." Stephen's face turned ghost white. "I what? Who?" Jerome narrowed his eyes. "Take a wild guess." Stephen deflated like a balloon. "It was Kim." Bingo. He wanted to deny it. He wanted to reach for excuses. But Jerome raised a hand. "Don't. Just shut up, Stephen." The room filled with silence. A heavy, judgmental silence. "You've had complaints about her for how long?" I thought she just needed more training," Stephen whispered. "Training?" Jerome laughed, short and bitter. "This isn't a trainee who forgot how to print a receipt. She's a problem. And she's your problem." Stephen looked like he wanted to melt through the floor. Jerome took a breath, then pointed to the door. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to walk out there, and you're going to fire her. Right now, in front of everyone." Stephen's mouth opened, closed. "Right now?" "Yes, right now. And if you don't, I'll do it myself. And then I'll fire you right after." There was no bravado in his voice, just truth. Stephen nodded slowly. Okay. 2 minutes later, the lobby fell into an awkward, electric hush as the general manager of one of the most prestigious hotels in the country walked up to the front desk and dropped the hammer. Kim's smirk vanished. Her defenses cracked. She tried to argue, cried, blamed the system, blamed stress, blamed misunderstandings. Didn't matter. Stephen's voice was shaky, but his words were final. "You're dismissed." Kim stared at him like he'd stabbed her in the chest, then turned, saw Jerome watching silently in the corner, and everything clicked. Her face twisted, furious, humiliated. She stormed toward the exit, heels clacking like thunder. Just before reaching the doors, she spun around and hissed, "You have no idea who I am." Jerome didn't flinch. "That's the problem. You had no idea who I was." The door slid open. Kim was gone. Justice delivered. But it wasn't over. Stephen staggered back to his office like a man who'd just been publicly executed. Jerome followed calmly, like the executioner returning his blade to the sheath. Stephen sank into his chair. "I handled it," he said weakly. Jerome smirked. "No, Stephen, I handled it. You just stood there looking constipated." A nervous chuckle. "Well, Jerome cut him off. "You let this hotel rot. You ignored complaint after complaint because you didn't want to deal with confrontation. That's not leadership. That's cowardice." "I'll fix everything," Stephen whispered. "I swear." "No," Jerome said, standing. "You won't." "I will." And then, with surgical efficiency, he delivered the final blow. "You're fired." Stephen's face crumpled. "Mr. Wilson, please. Relax. I'm sure there's a motel somewhere that could use your leadership skills." Jerome turned and left the office. And once again, the lobby watched him move, not as a stranger, but as someone known. A clerk whispered, "That's Jerome Wilson." Another gasped. A bellboy clutched his cap like he was in church. And Jerome? He walked straight to the front desk, leaned forward, and said, "Listen up." The staff stood at attention like soldiers before a general. "Things are about to change," he said. "Fast." Then he picked up the house phone and dialed. "This is Wilson. Shut this place down for audit. Comp every guest. Reevaluate every employee. Effective immediately." Silence. Then one of the clerks whispered, "You're that Jerome Wilson?" He smiled. "Yeah, I'm that guy." And in that moment, every brick of the empire he built stood tall again. Because real leaders don't just build kingdoms. They clean them up when no one else will. The elevator doors closed behind Jerome with a soft ding, sealing him momentarily in a quiet space that smelled of pine-scented polish and years of secrets. He didn't lean back. He stood upright, arms crossed, staring at his own reflection in the mirrored panel. A leader, a builder, a witness to his own empire's decay. And now it's rebirth. By the time he returned to room 1427, his phone was already buzzing. Corporate, the board, Stephen. He ignored them all, let them sweat. He sat at the desk, poured himself a glass of bourbon from a minibar, aged like him, not just by years but by battles. Then he opened his laptop. First order of business, Kim. She wasn't just fired. She was blacklisted. Her name flagged across every hotel in the group. No rehiring, no transferring, no second chances. Because when you infect trust, you don't just lose your job, you lose the privilege of the position. Next, Stephen Lane. He'd been dangling by a thread for years, protected by politeness and inertia of inaction. Jerome had given him one final test. He failed. Jerome drafted the termination paperwork himself. Quick, clean, done. But not everything tonight was about removal. Some of it was about redemption. He turned to the guest complaint database. There were hundreds, many overlooked, many dismissed. He scrolled through them not as a CEO, but as a fellow human being, a woman from Atlanta who'd been told her reservation was lost, only to discover a walk-in guest had taken her suite. An elderly man from Baton Rouge whose military veteran status had been ignored during check-in. A young couple celebrating their 25th anniversary, given a room next to ongoing renovations with no apology, no discount, just indifference. Jerome didn't just issue refunds. He upgraded their next stay to VIP, personalized apology notes, and made sure their names were remembered. Because justice wasn't just punishment, it was restoration. It was rebuilding trust, brick by brick, name by name. He crafted a new memo, a message to every employee in the Wilson Hospitality Group. If you wear our badge, you don't just serve. You protect dignity. You honor every guest like they were your own parent, sibling, or spouse. If that sounds like too much, leave now. But if you're ready to build something greater than a paycheck, welcome. Let's make this an empire again. By dawn, the hotel would shut down temporarily. Every employee would be reviewed, every policy rewritten, every space, from the lobby to the laundry room, re-examined for cracks in integrity. And Jerome, he would lead it himself, not with press releases, not with staged apologies, but with presence. Because real leaders don't rule from penthouses. They walk the halls. They listen. They remember where they came from. At 3:17 a.m., there was a soft knock on the door. Jerome opened it to find a young front desk clerk, the same one who'd nodded nervously earlier. He was holding a tray. On it, a cup of coffee and a folded note. I thought you might be working late, sir," the young man said, eyes wide with both respect and fear. Jerome looked at him for a moment, then took the tray. The coffee was still steaming. The note read, "Thank you for not forgetting us." Jerome blinked, surprised by the tightness in his throat. He looked up. "What's your name?" "Malik." The clerk said, "First week here." Jerome nodded. "First of many, I hope." And as the door closed softly behind him, Jerome took a sip of the coffee. Simple, bitter, honest, like the truth. And in that moment, he realized justice had been served, but dignity was just being restored. The sun was barely rising. Faint golden streaks crept through the slats of the blinds in room 1427, casting long shadows across the floor, like memories stretching back from decades ago. Jerome stood at the window, coffee in hand, staring out at the loading dock below. The same dumpster, the same service entrance where, 22 years ago, he had been denied entry to this hotel's kitchen as a young contractor without clearance. That night, he sat on a coal crate, drawing up sketches for what would one day become the Wilson Empire. He never told anyone that story, because some memories aren't meant to be shared. They're meant to fuel. Behind him, the laptop still glowed with the results of the night. Audits scheduled, terminations issued, redemptions granted, guests refunded, employees warned or inspired. Justice had swept through these halls not like a hurricane, but like a wave, deliberate, unrelenting, cleansing. And yet, Jerome didn't feel victorious. He felt quiet, Because victory wasn't firing Kim. It wasn't watching Stephen crumble. It was seeing a hotel that had lost its soul begin to breathe again. He sipped the coffee, the one brought by the rookie clerk, Malik. Jerome had seen something in that kid. Something he remembered in himself once. Hope, still unbroken. He glanced at the folded note again on the nightstand. Thank you for not forgetting us. That line stayed with him. It echoed louder than the silence Kim left behind. It echoed deeper than Stephen's panicked apologies. It reminded him why he started this empire to begin with. Not to prove he could, not to get rich, but to build something his parents would have been proud of. Something that protected people like them. He looked out at the city again. New York stretched wide and unapologetic as always. And yet, in this tiny pocket of brick and glass, something had changed. Not everything, but something. Enough. Jerome exhaled slowly. A long, weathered breath. The kind only men his age could truly understand. And as he turned away from the window, jacket in hand, he didn't feel like a CEO. He felt like a guardian of people, of standards, of memory. And that was more than enough. There are emotional stories that entertain, and then there are justice stories, the kind that stay with you long after the final word. This was not just a tale of a black man checking into his own hotel. This was a heartwarming story of memory, dignity, and long overdue reckoning. A reminder that sometimes unraveled fates must be seen clearly before they can be stitched into something whole again. We live in a world where people get overlooked, not because they lack value, but because others refuse to see it. And yet, incredible stories like Jerome's tell us, real change doesn't need permission. It just needs one person brave enough to say, no more. What began as a quiet act of disrespect became a moment of awakening, a wave of justice that didn't just wash away the rot. It revived something purer, accountability, leadership, and legacy. Let this be more than a narrated story. Let it be a mirror, a call, a promise. Because somewhere in some lobby, someone is still waiting to be treated with basic human decency, not as a number, not as an inconvenience, but as someone who matters. So share this, hold it close, pass it on like an heirloom of truth. And remember, the greatest power you hold is the ability to make someone feel seen.